The topic today is future of finance, and we're trying to understand as the future finance leaders, what are some of the things and trends that we should watch out for and prepare for. And I want to focus on three trends today. One is more strategy, the other is more risk, and the other is more ESG. And we'll talk about how these impact the CFOs and also how data and analytics and the tools that CFOs have really position us well to respond to these three major trends. On more strategy, just to highlight what that means, there was a survey that Grant Thornton did of CFOs recently in May 2020, and 42% of the CFOs said they spend as much as half their time in a strategist role. We'll talk about what that means, is taking more of a strategic role for CFOs. And then on more risk, I've included a quote for you from a Federal Reserve governor in US that talks about vulnerabilities associated with elevated risk appetite. And talking about stock prices being high relative to earnings, and the appetite for risk has increased broadly as meme stock episodes demonstrate. And we'll talk about some of the trends in US particularly, but globally also, where there is a heightened interest in pursuit of risk with the hope that it would result in higher yields and returns. And so we'll talk about what that more risk environment looks like and what that means for CFOs and finance leaders. And thirdly, we're going to talk about ESG. ESG stands for Environmental Social Governance Trends. And this is a global trend, as many countries in the world and leaders in the world are recognizing the dangers of climate change and looking at ways to address that, as well as more trends towards social and governance and inclusivity and diversity. And this is showing up in a variety of ways. One example I gave here is the European Union launched a €1 trillion Green Deal to invest in environmental initiatives with the goal of achieving carbon neutral Europe by 2050. And we'll talk about what this means for CFOs. And then, of course, underlying all this and supporting all these trends is data revolution and how CFOs can leverage that to be more successful on these three trends. First, on the strategy, more strategy, and CFOs as chief strategy officers. Really, our role has changed from being chief accounting officers and closing the books and looking backwards to looking ahead, developing strategy, and being more a chief strategy officer. There's data I found that showed that 29% of CEOs hired post-pandemic in US were formerly CFOs, recognizing that CFOs now have a stronger suite of skills on strategy, which positions them well for being CEOs. And there's a lot of stuff that we do as CFOs that really dovetails into the strategy role. One example I use a lot is the budget versus actual exercise. All of us in the finance world do budget versus actual variance analysis. But we can elevate that from just a purely accounting exercise to a forecasting tool to understand not just what happened last month and why revenue or expenses were higher or lower than expected, but what that means for the future month. Was revenue lower this month because it was shifted to a future month and actually we'll see higher revenues in the future? Or is revenue lower this month because we lost a key customer and we should expect to see that trend continue? And most importantly, what we should do to combat that trend and bring the plans back on track. So using that budget versus actual exercise that we all CFOs have as a forecasting tool and to generate a conversation around what is our strategy going forward, how are we performing against that today, and what do we need to do to continue to stay on track or get ahead of the plan.